This is the third episode in a three-part series. This episode discusses alleged intimate partner violence. It includes discussion of recovery scenes and autopsy. Listener discretion is advised. All parties discussed are assumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. This is The Fall Line. Over the past two episodes, we've covered the 1976 disappearance of Patricia Otto, a 24-year-old wife and mother from Lewiston, Idaho. Her husband, Ralph Otto, was publicly identified by police as a suspect in her missing persons case. But there wasn't enough evidence to formally charge him, not with anything directly related to Patty. And when Ralph died in 1983, so did the chance to further question him about Patty's disappearance. His young daughters, Natalie and Suzanne, were raised by his sister. Natalie believed in her father's innocence and wanted to find Patty. She began research into Patty's case that would span the rest of her life. Until her death in 2006, Natalie tracked down files, dental records, court transcripts, interviews, anything and everything that you could think of, and she amassed it all into a huge collection of evidence. Now, her sister Suzanne uses that same wealth of information, plus what she's gathered on her own, but toward different ends. She's not trying to prove Ralph Otto's innocence. In fact, she believes that he is the strongest suspect in her mother's disappearance, and she's been trying to retrace his steps since that night in August to discover what became of Patty. Patty Otto has received a fair amount of media coverage, more than most people featured on our show. Much of that press is a direct result of the work of her daughter Suzanne and the advocates at Light the Way and Mel Jetterberg, who's been advocating for another case, an unidentified 1978 homicide victim known as the Finley Creek Jane Doe. And it's the intersection of these cases that brings their stories to the fall line. What happened between 1978 and now to create a web of uncertainty that's left everyone caught without answers. It was late August 1978, near Elgin, Oregon, when a group of hunters stumbled upon a shallow grave. According to the Albany Democrat-Herald, it was clear that animals had been digging in the brush. They'd exposed bone in the loose soil near Finley Creek. Per the Herald, quote, the grave was about 200 yards from an old mill site, which is a regular parking place for hunters' vehicles. The paper noted that the area was about, quote, 5 miles from the nearest house. According to the Observer, there was a permanent hunter's campsite nearby too, and a road, so not a totally rural area. A well-worn deer trail ran through the area where the victim's grave had been discovered. According to the Democrat-Herald, law enforcement believed the victim to be, quote, a young female adult who may have been killed by a cord found in the grave, one that then DA Dale Mammon described as, quote, a radio antenna cable, but that it was supposition pending examination by Dr. William Brady, state medical examiner. Dr. Brady's lab was based in Portland, about 4 hours away. The victim likely had, quote, sandy-colored hair and was found with the remains of several articles of clothing. Quote, a halter top, red trousers, and ankle-high work boots. Police files note that a length of nylon cord was found at the grave too. The victim's clothing, they were remnants. What an officer at the scene described as red cloth and white cloth with small red hearts. On further inspection at the medical examiner's office, officials would be able to discern a little more. Her pants were, quote, Catalina brand size 15-16, which showed evidence of possible alterations. For reference, the pants were about a modern women's size 8 or 10. The article notes that the victim, quote, may have been pregnant. We know medico-legal professionals found bones at the scene that they suspected might have been those of a full or near full-term infant. But fetal and infant bones, they can easily be confused with small animal bones. Per the Arizona State Museum, quote, the most common human bones to be mistaken for non-human animal bones are those of infants. They are sufficiently different from adults and even the bones of older children that they can cause considerable confusion. And the victim's grave had been exposed for a long time. with predator activity apparent, which made intermingling a possibility. It's not unusual to find animal bones at a recovery scene like that of Finley Creek. The medical examiner's files make it clear that only partial remains were found. Her remains were likely scattered by animals or environmental factors. That is why a professional review was needed. Initial county reports give us more detail on the victim, including her clothing and further description of the recovery scene. Per these initial reports, the recovery site itself was made more clear. Quote, a brushy and timbered hillside, approximately 300 yards from the road. Dirt at the grave site was sieved for further evidence, and the file notes that a metal detector was used as well, but with negative results. At the disturbed grave, law enforcement discovered most of a cranium and mandible, bones from the spine, ribs, and some bones of what they described as, quote, the arms, legs, and pelvis. Later reports also noted that the victim's hair was, quote, strewn near her skull, and that, quote, sections of wood were lying on the west side of the hole. They also noted that those small bones we mentioned, they were found, quote, near the pelvic area. When the Finley Creek Jane Doe made it to the state lab for examination, there was a thorough accounting of her remains, but no detailed notes on the possible fetal bones, at least not in the files that we received. It seems that this grave had been disturbed to the point that the full recovery scene might have stretched farther than the immediate area surrounding the shallow hole. Bones and other material could be recovered at some distance away if a search was done. We don't have any further details in the files we reviewed as to how extensive the recovery search was or how far afield initial efforts might have been. For instance, was a grid search done to recover further bones? Or multiple searches over days? We can't be sure that the records released via FOIA cover all the efforts by investigators, but in what we reviewed, we did not see any notes regarding recovery efforts beyond the primary scene of the grave. There was actually another Jane Doe who was discovered in Oregon, just a month before Finley Creek Jane Doe. That was in late July of 1978, in Multnomah County, and in the woods near Lewis and Clark College. This victim was another young white female, in roughly the same age range, but she would eventually be identified as a missing woman named Annette Willis. This detail is important, because there was some initial confusion between these cases. You see, when the Finley Creek Jane Doe's remains were discovered, someone reached out to Lewiston police in Idaho to let them know that a woman who seemed to match Patty's description had been found. After all, she had light hair, was wearing similar clothing, and she was in the right age range. Based on police reports, it seems that when law enforcement initially contacted the state about Finley Creek Jane Doe, there may have been some miscommunication about which case was which. That is, which victim was the closest match for Patty. But later paperwork does appear to clarify the matter. There's also been some speculation that Finley Creek Jane Doe and Annette Willis's records might have been mixed up or combined, but based on a review of the files, that appears to be unlikely. However, there's still the matter of Finley Creek Jane Doe and a comparison with Patty Otto. The notes on this are scarce, and they're spread across a few files. But from what we, Suzanne, and Mel Jetterberg, you'll be hearing from her very soon, have surmised, the exclusion came down to Patty's wisdom teeth. There was a note from the medical examiner that Patty could not be the Finley Creek Jane Doe because she'd had all of her wisdom teeth removed, and the Finley Creek Jane Doe was only missing one. We aren't sure how that information was communicated to the ME's office because there is absolutely no record of Patty having all 4 of her wisdom teeth removed. She did have a panoramic X-ray done in 1975, which dentists have told Suzanne can be a precursor to wisdom teeth removal. And her sister Alice remembers that Patty did eventually have one wisdom tooth removed, the upper right, though there are no official records of this. But again, there aren't any dental records to indicate that Patty Otto had 4 wisdom teeth removed. Patty had very little recorded dental work, which could have been another possible reason for the rule-out at the time. Dr. Brady had noted 11 fillings for Finley Creek Jane Doe, but that was not his stated reasoning. In Patty's official exclusion, the wisdom teeth were the factor, and Patty Otto has been listed as excluded ever since. Patty Otto was also not publicly known to be pregnant, though that certainly cannot be stated conclusively. That could have been another factor, but it's not noted anywhere in the paperwork that we reviewed. According to records collected by Suzanne and Mel, Patty's parents were brought in to view Finley Creek Jane Doe's clothing at some point and said that they did not recognize it. Suzanne has wondered, though, if the shoes were the sticking point. The remnants of the clothing were such a close match to her mother's, and she never knew of Patty to wear work boots or even hiking boots, which were the shoes that were found in the grave. But Suzanne has thought about whether those shoes could have actually been added post-mortem to make it seem like Finley Creek Jane Doe was perhaps a lost hiker, rather than someone who'd been killed and dumped in the woods. Finley Creek Jane Doe remained unidentified through the 1970s and the 1980s. Though she was compared to a number of women, none of those leads panned out. And in 1990, her case was officially closed. The evidence was destroyed, and Finley Creek Jane Doe's remains were cremated. The case files, with photos and dental charting, were maintained. It's hard for modern audiences to imagine such a thing. But up until the mid to late 90s, cremation of unidentified victims was quite commonplace. We've seen it many times. Though DNA science existed, the full scope of what it could do and what it would do in the future was not well understood. When it comes to developing a viable DNA profile, testing cremains yields a low probability of success. The material that retains our DNA is simply burned away in the cremation process. And what's more, not that anyone knew it for years, the location of the Finley Creek Jane Doe's cremains, that was unclear too. They'd have to be located for testing to even be attempted, and no one was attempting that because her case was closed. Not until a local woman named Mel Jetterberg took an interest. And that brings us to how the long-closed case of Finley Creek Jane Doe resurfaced. Though her file was closed, it was retained, and local authorities entered her information into the NamUs database, and thus the Doe Network. That's how Mel Jetterberg found her. Mel is one of the few people who became interested in Finley Creek Jane Doe. The Redgraves, who you've heard from on this show many times, are as well, and so is an Arkansas researcher named Jason Futch. Nowadays, Mel considers herself to be an advocate for the case. But when she began, she had a much simpler goal in mind, to find out if there were any unidentified persons cases in her area, and to see if she could help. She studied library science and criminology in school, and then she'd gone into social work. So she came with a certain set of research skills. And Mel said she'd always been interested in cold cases. Prior to your involvement in the Finley Creek Jane Doe case, had you ever had any interest in following specifically Doe cases? When did you first become aware of unidentified persons cases? Because we often find that people really don't know nearly as much about the issue of unidentified persons, not like we do missing persons or homicides among the identified.
I wouldn't say that I had a specific interest about Doe cases particularly. I would say that the idea of missing persons was really intriguing to me at the time, just because you would hear these stories and you would often hear words like without a trace or just vanished. And my logical brain would tell me that's not possible. How can people just vanish? And then the more I read these stories, the more it started to dawn on me that, well, you end up with these remains in other places that maybe don't correlate with a person who went missing in the same place, or the circumstances, they can't immediately figure out what happened to them. And so the two kind of started meshing together the more stories I would read or listen to or whatever it might be. And so I have gotten quite an education about the number of unidentified there are across the country.
Eventually, Mel's knowledge made her begin to wonder what cases existed in her own backyard.
And since I was in a small town too, born and raised here, I was like, well, why don't I start at home and just look and see what I can find? I read a book by Deborah Halbers called The Skeleton Crew, and just hearing these resources like the Doe Network that are out there that you can look at to see if there are any unidentifieds or any missing people from your area. I did that. I sat down one Friday night and just logged onto the Doe Network and, of course, put in Union County, Oregon, because that's where I live, and was not expecting to find anything there. I had never heard in the course of almost 50 years of being alive of an unidentified body being found here, but yet there was one. She was listed as being in her early 20s, potentially pregnant. They described the clothing that she was wearing, where she was found.
After she did some digging, Mel discovered a small digital footprint on the case, mostly in online forum posts. One was from a man who'd carried out his own research.
A guy by the name of Jason Futch had reached out several years prior to when I found this entry on the Doe Network to our library here at Eastern Oregon University, and had the librarian dig up the newspaper clippings that she could find about the body, and he had posted those. And so that gave me a little bit more information about the circumstances under which she was found. It said more about what she was wearing. It talked about some statements that the district attorney had made at the time.
Mel decided to reach out to investigators and officials who'd been mentioned in the news articles that she'd seen. Of course, many were long retired, but she did find one man, the former district attorney Dale Mammon. He had a profile on LinkedIn.
While I hadn't had a lot of use for LinkedIn before that, this was the only social platform that I could find the district attorney on. His name was Dale Mammon. And he's an older guy. I went to school with his kids, and he was not on Facebook or anything like that. So that's what I initially started doing, was picking out names from these newspaper articles to see, all right, who's still with us? Who's still around here that maybe I could get a hold of and talk to? And then once I got a message back from Dale Mammon on LinkedIn, I went and had coffee with him and his lovely wife as well, just to get some information about what he remembered from the time. And he remembered the case very, very well. And so that was really nice. And he gave me some more direction to go in. He gave me contact information for the editor of our local newspaper and said, well, maybe you might want to get an article in the paper for those older folks who maybe aren't on social media and things like that. So that was fantastic. And he also was at the time the family attorney for the lead investigator on the case, whose name is Doc Baker. Doc Baker, however, at that time, very elderly, and his memory was not so good. And so Dale offered to go speak with Doc Baker and see if he remembered anything about the case. After I started speaking with people and listening to more podcasts, quite frankly, I kept hearing people refer to records requests, and I didn't really even know what that was. So I looked into how you might do that. And I found a kind of a boilerplate form online where if you have a case number, you plug in the case number, you send the request through their online system, and that led nowhere. The case number, the first case number, because there are two out there online, Oregon State Police came back and said, there's nothing attached to this. The second case number was somebody's parking ticket or traffic citation that had nothing to do with the case. So I actually attended a little seminar about how to do records requests, just so I would know what I was doing. And so we sent these records requests, very detailed, asking for exactly what we wanted. We want reports. We want pictures. If you have maps, if you have notes scribbled on a cocktail napkin, we want all of that. And we sent it to everyone. We sent it to city, state, and county people just to see who may have had what. And we finally did get the case file from a records technician in Salem. And to our wonderful surprise, it actually did have photos in it as well, which ended up being very important.
So, when you first found out about the Finley Creek Jane Doe, did you know right away that she'd been cremated and that the evidence had been destroyed in her case?
It was not until I read that case file that I discovered that the case had been closed. They couldn't determine who she was or what happened to her, and that the district attorney in 1990 said, all right, well, you can go ahead and destroy the evidence and the body too. So, and it didn't say cremation in the police file. I had to do some more digging with the funeral homes in this town to find out that that's what had actually happened to her.
That left Mel with a second investigation, trying to figure out who had cremated the Finley Creek Jane Doe and who currently had custody of her remains. As far as she could discover, no agency she contacted had maintained those records or the victim's remains.
So after I got the case file, there was a notation in there about a funeral home that she had been sent to. That's where her remains were actually stored for years and years. They weren't stored in an evidence locker here in La Grande. They were at this funeral home. And of course, the funeral home, the name of it back then was not one that exists now. So I found out that back then, if they needed somebody's remains to be cremated, they would send them to Walla Walla, Washington, which, while it is another state, it's really only an hour or so from here. Even though the body went to the funeral home in 1978 and the case was closed in 1990, there's no way of knowing what happened in the meantime, where any records went. So I was giving them these dates and they were trying to go find in their records anything pertaining to these mysterious circumstances that I laid out for them. And finally, they found a single sheet of paper with the Oregon State Police case number on it. And the notation said sent to a funeral home in Walla Walla and paper trail to the state mortuary board. And that's it. Just this handwritten note saying where she had gone. So I had a name of a funeral home. Very excited about that.
But that Walla Walla funeral home, they couldn't help Mel. They didn't have the records that she needed. They did suggest, though, that she contact the local coroner.
I went to the coroner's office's website first just to kind of get some contact information and poke around and see what I could see. And the county of Walla Walla had gotten a grant to build a website specifically for their unclaimed remains. And they had a lot. And so as I went through this website, I saw that there was a John Doe listed there with a death date of January 1st of 1993. And now I know it sounds like a leap, but I could just picture somebody coming along years later after somebody had been cremated, finding a bag and going, well, I don't know where these come from, but I'm finding them in 1993, so I'm just going to put this date on them, that kind of thing. Humans do that kind of thing all the time. So I reached out to the coroner and told him the story, went through the whole Finley Creek Jane Doe story, and I said, I'm curious about this John Doe that you have listed on your website. Can you tell me about it? And he went and did some digging and said, yes, that is indeed a bag of cremains. And there is a sticker on them from this funeral home that you said that she went to get cremated. And I got very, very excited.
What did he think about the date discrepancy?
He was not concerned about it. I think he knew, because he's the one who had engineered getting the website up and running. I think he knew there was room for it to be a possibility. And from what we understood, we had done some research about the Walla Walla area, and they didn't have any unidentified folks that had been found that person could be. They had unclaimed remains, but we were fairly certain that this doe that was sitting there was not from Walla Walla, that had likely come from somewhere else. So I think, and he knew that too, so he had not expressed any concern about the date discrepancy.
And were you not able to find any other does that could easily match up with those cremains?
Nope, we could not.
So, do the officials that you've dealt with, do they agree with you that these could potentially be the cremains of the Finley Creek Jane Doe?
I can say that none of them have said, no, it absolutely can't be her. I feel like they are as aware as we are that these paper trails have been severely broken and that anything is possible at this point.
So, while Mel believes it's likely, she cannot conclusively say that the cremains found in Walla Walla are those of Finley Creek Jane Doe. There just is not the proper paper trail to help her verify everything she'd need to follow the chain of custody. But she believes there's a good chance. She's also spent a lot of time examining all that paperwork that she received from investigators, including Finley Creek Jane Doe's dental charts, the possible comparisons, and the photos included in the file. Since they've managed to have forensic art completed in the case, people have begun to come forward with possible missing persons comparisons, but there's still been an ongoing issue: incomplete records on one side or another.
The problem that we are running into with that is that some of these missing women, while there is a dental chart that is available, it was done in the 70s as well, and sometimes those aren't complete either. And so even though there's one in particular that I can think of, a woman named Nancy Baird out of Utah, I get people asking me all the time, could this be her? It looks like her. Because if you look at Finley Creek Jane Doe's forensic art and photos of Nancy Baird, who went missing out of Utah, they look strikingly similar. But while Nancy has dental charts, they really don't say anything on them, because I have seen those and her name's not even on them. So while there are dental charts to compare, they cannot be used as a rule out. And that's one of the things that we keep running into as well, because we have these photographs of Finley Creek Jane Doe's skull and her teeth and her dentition, but the photographs are not very good. And it's very hard for any kind of expert to say with any surety that this person is not Finley Creek Jane Doe, because the pictures just aren't good enough. They're not good enough quality to do that. So that's where we are at.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles Mackenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
And that brings us to the moment when Mel and Suzanne connected. Suzanne told The Observer that it was 2021 when she was scrolling through Facebook. She was looking at missing persons postings, and it was there that she saw the forensic art of Finley Creek Jane Doe. She discovered the reconstruction was completed by Dr. Anthony Redgrave of Redgrave Forensics, who we mentioned earlier in the show. The image struck Suzanne. She told The Observer, quote, "I said, why am I here? I'm not a missing person." But of course, Suzanne's mother has been since 1976. When she read a description of what the Finley Creek Jane Doe was wearing when her remains were discovered, it was even more shocking. According to the Observer, Suzanne said, quote, "That was exactly what my mom had on last time I saw her." By that time, Mel had been running social media pages for Finley Creek Jane Doe for some time. Suzanne reached out and they talked. When they connected, Suzanne made another startling discovery. She had a number of personal connections to Finley Creek Jane Doe. She'd moved to Walla Walla with her family back in 1999, the same place where the Finley Creek Jane Doe's remains were potentially sent. And it's not just that Suzanne ended up in Walla Walla. It's that her second husband's family, they were the hunters who discovered Finley Creek Jane Doe's remains. Now, she'd never heard that story from them. They'd always assumed that the person's remains they'd found had been identified long ago. It was only when she came upon the news story and she talked to Mel that her husband's family remembered and told her about it. We asked Mel about her reaction when Suzanne first made contact, if she'd already known about Patty Otto. When did you first become aware of Patricia Otto's case? Was it through the Finley Creek Jane Doe's file or another way?
When I had been working on this case, I did see Patricia Otto's name on NamUs because she is listed as a rule out there. It didn't sink in very much, though, until Patricia Otto's daughter, Suzanne, reached out to me and said who she was. She told me the circumstances of her mom's disappearance, and she said, "How was my mother ruled out as being Finley Creek Jane Doe? Was it the pregnancy?" And she reached out to me in the summer of 2021. And it was at that moment that I realized, wait a minute, her name's on NamUs, but her name is not in my file. So I don't know how she was ruled out. And so that's when I first became aware, truly aware, of Patricia Otto's case beyond her name just being listed as a rule out on NamUs for Finley Creek Jane Doe.
We told you earlier in the episode about Patty's rule out and how that came to be, but Mel and Suzanne didn't know that then. They reached out to Oregon state authorities and got a copy of the note that Dr. Brady made about Patty's third molars, her wisdom teeth. In Suzanne's binders, inherited from her sister Natalie, she had a copy of Patty's panoramic X-ray. It showed that, at least in 1975, Patty had all of her wisdom teeth. A friend of Natalie's who worked at the same dentist's office years later. As we mentioned, a family member does recall Patty having had one wisdom tooth removed, but there are no records of her having all four taken out, the original exclusion reason. They spoke with Oregon authorities about having a new comparison done, but there have been issues there too. Because of the quality of the photos remaining of Finley Creek Jane Doe, it's been extremely difficult to do a thorough comparison to Patty. In the past, some consulted experts have felt that they could not offer a conclusive answer, and others have been varyingly more or less supportive of a match. As of February of 2023, Washington's NBC King 5 sought out further expert opinions. Per their reporting, they asked, quote, Washington State Patrol to see if one of their forensic odontologists could look at Otto's dental X-ray and compare that to the medical examiner's photos of the remains. They are confident it is not the same person. Mel and Suzanne, they are less sure, though. The number of experts who have felt uncomfortable offering an opinion with the photographic evidence at hand makes them feel that they need a more in-depth review. They believe that Finley Creek Jane Doe is likely Patty and that the cremains from Walla Walla are Finley Creek Jane Doe's. But the only way to prove that, right now, is with DNA. And when Dr. Redgrave helped them arrange for testing at Lakehead Labs in late 2022, they hoped that they'd get that chance. The Walla Walla coroner agreed to send cremains in for testing, but unfortunately, the results were not what everyone had hoped. The lab was unable to detect human nuclear DNA or mitochondrial DNA. That has not stopped Mel, Suzanne, and their supporters, though. They hope to do future testing, but they are most focused on a more thorough search of the area where Finley Creek Jane Doe was discovered. That's because if further remains can be found, remains that were not damaged by heat, then DNA testing will likely be successful. And they've been working on that. Along with the victim advocates, Shayna and Tates from Light the Way, they spoke with authorities about a new search of that area, and that did come to fruition. When exactly did that occur? And to your knowledge, what were officials searching for?
That took place in August of 2022, so a little over a year ago now. And what they were looking for were additional bones that might not have been recovered. Because if you read Dr. Brady's accounting of the bones that were found, there are some arm bones missing, part of the pelvis is missing, and they only recovered one small chunk of hair that was still attached to the skull. And I think they were likely looking for maybe other artifacts that were out there. So maybe if a ring had fallen off a finger and hadn't been recovered at the time, or, any other kind of jewelry or things along those lines. And they were working off of the fact that we had had several searches done by human remains detection dogs out there. And the major case sergeant for our area, Sean Belding, had been at the last one. So he saw those dogs at work and he saw the results that we got, which were confirmations in 2 different areas that there was scent being found there by those dogs. So they were looking for bones that had not been recovered. And what they ended up doing, though, was excavating the site that, as near as we could ascertain based on the prior reports and one of the eyewitnesses going back to the scene, they searched that area and just dug down fairly deep to see if they could find any other bones or any other human matter down there. And they were not able to find anything that looked like it could have been part of Finley Creek Jane Doe's remains.
Unfortunately, nothing was recovered, but Mel, Suzanne, and Light the Way are hopeful that there will be a second search. Mel said that a team of dogs hit on a few more areas that have not yet been rechecked. They continue to pursue more expert opinions, news coverage, to fundraise, and more than anything, to work as a team. Mel has become as involved in Patty's case as Suzanne has in Finley Creek Jane Doe's, and Light the Way is now advocating for both victims. They see all of the work as connected, whether or not Patty Otto is Finley Creek Jane Doe. For Mel, it started with the need to help out with one case, but it's become a major part of her life's purpose.
I am one of those people who, once you find something that you are passionate about, whether you intended to find it or it found you, I cannot let it go. And I found that once I started really reflecting on this young woman who, when she died, was my parents' age. When she died, she likely died at the hands of somebody she knew and trusted. It just spoke to me in a way that I could not let go of. One of the other things to know about me is that one of the topics that I teach to workers with the state of Oregon is around supporting survivors of domestic violence. And once I got into this case and read the circumstances, when a young pregnant woman is murdered and dumped in the woods with nothing but the clothes on her back, to me, that screams intimate partner. And that just raised the stakes for me even more. It became super personal. And I just felt like I had to help. I had to help this woman because nobody else was helping her. And so that sparked off just this drive to do what I could do. It's really become a passion project. And it has transformed in the last couple of years because, of course, in the course of doing all this, I've met Suzanne. And she being the daughter of a missing woman, is even more passionate about this than I am. And so joining forces with her has really helped push things forward and motivate and help us build our game plan, really, and just keep fighting and keep pushing. Because now, even if Finley Creek Jane Doe doesn't turn out to be her mom, I have a new friend who is missing her mom. And I will do anything I possibly can to help her find her mom.
And Suzanne feels the same way about Mel and Finley Creek Jane Doe's case. We talked about what her response would be if Patty was to be ruled out by DNA.
If she's ruled out by DNA, that would mean like they're saying, I don't match her. My next step would be then I am somehow drawn and connected to this woman, and I have got to find her family and get her back to her family. My steps would be, who is she, so I can return her to her family? Because I have now invested 2 years of my life to prove that that's my mother. And we have tried every route to prove the opposite, that it's one of the women that were presented. We've done everything to prove every one of those women that were presented. What if it's them? What if, because the dentals are wrong, what if it was one of the girls that were presented? I've accepted that. I'm like, it's not my mom? Well, good Lord, it's someone's mom. Do you think I'm going to just walk away and say like, oh, it's not my mom? I'd be like, wow, I'm shocked. I can't believe it's not my mom. But that's someone's mother or their daughter. It's someone's daughter for sure. And it could be someone's mother. I've got to help this family bring home their loved one. I would immediately want to put my focus into, I want to find who she belongs to then, because for some reason, my father-in-law, who was only 8 years old at the time, found this body, and I moved to Walla Walla and married his son. I've got to find this connection.
So for now, Suzanne, Mel, and Light the Way work both cases every way they can. They're concentrating on fundraising, media awareness, and new avenues to testing. Mel told us about some of the things that they've accomplished so far.
It was after I met Suzanne that we were able to do some dog searches. We also did a fundraising event early on when we first realized that there were cremains out there. We called it a night with the Finley Creek Jane Doe, and we put it out there on our social media, and we invited the district attorney, Dale Mammon, who handled the case. We invited him to come and speak. We also it was a fundraiser, it was an awareness raiser for Patty's case rather than Finley Creek Jane Doe's. However, when we talk about one case, we generally talk about the other when we do any kind of events. So we held a party last year in honor of Patty Otto's 70th birthday. We marched up the main street of Lewiston. We started at the courthouse where Patty's husband had been held initially for some of the crimes that he committed. But we marched up the street and held up signs and wore t-shirts that said, "Where's Patty?" on the front of them. And they say, "Who's FCJD?" on the back. So that's one of the awareness things that we did, where we drew some news coverage and things like that. We have teamed up with Light the Way, who have been phenomenal because they have redesigned Patty's missing poster. They designed a Finley Creek Jane Doe graphic, updated the old one that I had just to drop into social media every Monday on Missing Person Monday. We've just done all kinds of things like that. We have collaborated with Oregon's Crime Stoppers to offer a reward for any information leading to Finley Creek Jane Doe's identity. And, a conviction in the case usually has to happen if you get the reward, but oftentimes money is an incentive. So that's out there. We have worked with Lewiston Police Department to reach out to an outfit called Face Lab UK to see if they can potentially do anything with Patty's X-rays, her photographs, and Finley Creek Jane Doe's photographs to see if there's any way to use maybe clean those up and use their software to uncover data points in those facial structures that might indicate that those two are the same people. Beyond that, we've also been looking into circumstantial evidence, right? So we've been really trying to find people who have seen, who maybe saw a woman who looked like Finley Creek Jane Doe in this area here, right? We've had posters made. We've done our timeline project, and it's just getting people to come out of whatever, comb their memories, see if they remember anything. If they remember anything about Ralph's whereabouts, which is Suzanne's dad, if they saw him or if they saw his truck in this area.
We asked what kind of support Mel would like to see for both cases.
I would love to have more law enforcement resource put towards doing more excavating out there at the site. They did re-excavate what we believe was the original grave site, to the best that we could zero in on. But there are those other sites that the dogs indicated that I would really like to see more excavation done there to see if there's any bones or other physical evidence out there. And as far as the public, I would love to see if people know resources, or if people remember that their grandma spent a summer in Union County back in the 70s, or she liked to hitchhike with her buddies in college. Talk to your families about what they might have been doing in the 70s if you know that they were from this area, and to not be shy about reaching out. People can reach out to me at the Finley Creek Jane Doe socials anytime.
And for Suzanne, this work has brought her a lot of things. New friends, a new possible path to an answer, a second case that she'll advocate for no matter what. But it's also brought her closer to Patty. She has thought a lot about who her mother was, as she knew her back in the 70s, and how it connects to who Suzanne herself is today.
Learning who she is now, I'm like, oh my gosh, she stood back up to him and she hit him because I am just like her. I'm like, you're not going to tell me what I'm going to do. And I'm not scared of the fact that you are bigger than me and you are stronger than me. I got that from her. So much from her. And that people are going to say, oh, you can't do that. Watch me. I got that from her. And I would never have known that, right? I would never know that what I learned as a small child from 0 to 3, also being a mother, so funny that I'm like, I'm an incredible mother. It came so naturally to me. I didn't have to be taught. I didn't have to be told. That came so naturally because she mothered me for those 3 years and gave me such a good, solid foundation that I knew I was going to be okay. She gave me that. I'm grateful.
But at the same time, she's frustrated because she has waited a long time and she's ready for resolution.
How can I grieve? How can I really grieve the loss when all I have right now is it could be your mother? It could be Patty. I think it's Patty. Somebody else thinks it's Patty. A lot of people think it's Patty. But then at what point do I get to grieve and say, I lost my mom. I've never had a funeral. We never had a service. We never had a closure.
Maybe our audience can help with that, with resolution. You can find flyers for both Patty and Finley Creek Jane Doe on our social media and Light the Way's website page. And you can follow Suzanne's TikTok and all of the established social media for both cases. We have linked everything in the show notes. If you're a medical legal professional who'd like to help, you can reach out as well. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Patricia Otto, please contact Captain Jeff Clone at the Lewiston Police Department at 208-746-0171. If you have any information regarding the woman known as the Finley Creek Jane Doe, please contact Dr. Vance of the Oregon State Police at 971-673-8300 or Crime Stoppers of Oregon. Tips can be submitted online at crimestoppersoforegon.com, or their free mobile app can be downloaded at p3tips.com. Crime Stoppers of Oregon offers cash rewards of up to $2,500 for information reported to Crime Stoppers that leads to an arrest in any unsolved felony crime, and tipsters can remain anonymous. Next episode, we'll be discussing victim advocacy in the cases of Patricia Otto and the Finley Creek Jane Doe with Light the Way, who you've heard about throughout the past 3 episodes, and on our mid-season episode featuring Carolyn DeFord and her mother, Leona Kinsey. We'll also learn more about what victim advocacy entails and get an overview of all the cases they're currently advocating for through their organization. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, and pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show on your podcast app of choice. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case and the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified persons cases, is out everywhere as hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books and through your local library. Find out more in the link in our show notes. If you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who've appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research by Brian Waters. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove, produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Brandy C. Williams and Vic Kennedy. And, as always, our most special thanks to Liz Lipka.